Today, we're going to be talking about capacity planning. Capacity planning is something we do a lot here at Domestique. We do a lot of our customers. For those of you either in RevOps or on the go-to-market side, there's something hopefully you're doing on a regular basis. It has changed a lot, particularly in the last, call it year and a half, particularly with the advent of AI. So we'll be kind of chatting through that. What's cool for today's conversation is we brought in some experts in the capacity planning. I'll give a 2-second overview and let them kind of also give an overview. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Reese, one of the two co-founders here at Domestique. Alex, that other guy on the phone call there, he's my partner in crime. So Alex and I have done, I don't know, a bajillion capacity plans together over our days. But anyways, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I'm going to be more kind of the MC, and we're going to hopefully hear more from some experts here. So first individual, love to kind of introduce Grady. Grady is actually one of our teammates here at Domestique. However, the reason why we want to bring Grady on is I don't know if I've met a single person who's done more capacity planning than Grady. So he's done countless different, types of go-to-market motions, various kind of like industries. I've seen more capacity plans come from Grady. And so like, if there is truly an expert in this, like Grady would be one of them. Grady, you want to give a 30-second TLDR, not only about your background, but then give us a fun fact too.
Reese loves his fun facts. Yeah, hey everyone, nice to meet you if I haven't met you before. Grady Williams, based in DC. That is not my real background, but it has been snowing a lot here on the East Coast. Yeah, I've been with Domestique for a couple of years now, worked with a ton of our clients on capacity planning and just helping them understand, when to make the right, like when to hire, who they should hire, what quota should be, all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, I've been working in RevOps for 5 or 6 years now. Before that, I kind of cut my teeth in sales, like a lot of RevOps folks. Started as a BDR, kind of worked my way up through the org, and I've been working in various tech startups since 2012, all across the U.S. So did a stint in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, New York City, as well as Denver, and now based in DC. But yeah, excited for the webinar today.
Awesome. And Grady, you want to give your cow judging fun fact?
Yeah, my fun fact. So being from Georgia, this is very much a Georgia thing. I was a regional champion cattle judge in high school. It was kind of one of those things that we had to do for class somehow. I think it was part of woodshop class or something. We had to get involved with some local like 4-H events. Anyway, turns out I was pretty good at judging cattle. Has no relevance to the webinar content today, but if you are going to a cattle auction or something for some random reason, let me know.
Cool. And second guest, we've got Warner Schmidt. He's the founder and CEO of Lative, which is a capacity planning AI software. So what's cool is Warner's got a bunch of thoughts about how do you think about capacity planning, particularly from a technology standpoint, and how is AI changing things? Warner, you want to give a 30-second TLDR, and I'm going to ask for a fun fact. So you're on mute, good sir.
A second, I'm mute there. Sorry, apologies. Well, hi everyone. All right, Alex, thanks for having me on. Great to be talking with you about capacity planning. A bit about me: 20+ years in RevOps. So I've been in a while. The same thing. Not as many capacity plans that Grady's had to do, but we're trying to help automate it with a bit of technology behind it. And so about four years ago, founded Lative, a sales planning and decision intelligence platform to help with a bit of automation around all this good stuff with quotas and planning and targets and the important part capacity planning. So that's pretty much how we got here. I guess fun fact, I was hoping to stay in corporate and not do a startup, and then ended up doing a startup. And so I think about that corporate job a lot on some days, but it's all good. And hopefully we're building a good technology here to help all of us and everyone on the call make our lives a bit easier.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate you being here today, Warner. So All right. What are we going to cover? We're going to talk through kind of like what is capacity planning, and specifically where, when we see a fail, and we've seen all sorts of failures, what are the common kind of missteps? When you're doing capacity planning well, what should that timeline and process look like? What are some of the core building blocks to it? We're going to talk through this concept of like a bottoms up build versus a top down build, and we'll kind of get into what we mean there and how to kind of marry that. There's something we affectionately refer to as the oh shit meeting. There's actually 3 of them, but we'll talk about what that means. And then we're going to talk about like how do you actually take a demand council and operationalize it moving forward. We leverage something called the demand council and things like that. And then we're going to wrap up today of like, how does technology and AI fit into all of this, right? This is definitely we're going to be tapping a lot of Warner's expertise. So like I said, ask questions along the way. Love to dive in and kind of chat through any questions. So we always like to start by baselining everybody about kind of like what is RevOps, and like at its highest level, we like to think of RevOps as the connective tissue across your entire go-to-market. And when we talk about that, that specifically means truly your product or service, marketing, BDR, sales, PS, CS, support, all in line with finance, and then 5 work streams where the order is important. Your go-to-market strategy, then your go-to-market process, your tech stack, the data that comes out of enablement. Why is that important for what we're talking about today? A lot of like what capacity planning is taking your go-to-market strategy, being able to kind of codify that and understand what is the data to be able to track whether you're on or off pace here. So we just like to take the kind of 30 seconds to baseline this, because this is kind of like what sets the stage for the conversation moving forward. Because we're going to spend a lot of today talking about that strategy, that process, how does that show up in tooling, and specifically the data piece. All right, Grady, I know you've seen all manners of sins, all sorts of kind of like issues when it comes to capacity planning. These are 6 of the things we've seen a lot. What's your favorite? What are the best stories? Where do you think the mistakes that people make the most of?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts of capacity planning is really a lot of the pre-work that goes into it that people maybe don't think about, such as just aligning on like what the definition of certain things are. So maybe it's an MQL, or this is what pipeline means. Even something as simple as like, what stage do we measure pipeline? Like that is always a discussion that we have with executives, and there's a different answer depending on which department you ask, if it's marketing or sales or the CEO. And so I think just the pre-work that goes into it, people maybe don't really realize, of just aligning on what the kind of North Star is for each of your metrics, how you pull those from a reporting perspective. Do you trust the data? There's the whole garbage in, garbage out kind of paradigm. But yeah, I think the hardest part is trying to get alignment between all the different departments who kind of operationalize metrics differently and work in silos. It's to try to get everyone aligned to kind of a North Star of like, this is what we mean by pipeline. This is what we mean by all these different metrics, and here's how we're going to track them. So that's always like one of the hardest parts of kind of setting up a capacity plan for the first time.
And people would be shocked at how few organizations are aligned on that data. Like, you would be surprised when you ask different stakeholders how many different definitions you get. Warner, from this list, or maybe something that's not on this list, what's the 1 or 2 classic mistakes outside of those kind of like building blocks that Grady was talking about that you see are the kind of most common mistakes?
I think one of the big ones is using quota and quota attainment and calling that a capacity plan. So that's the we see that a lot, and to your point, Russ, it's just we see it more often than we'd like, and we just know that's a very risky approach to take a quota number, assume attainment, and then call that your capacity plan. So many variables in it, but how many aren't looking at what we're looking at on the screen to really understand the nuts and bolts that actually make up a true capacity plan.
And I just want to hammer home on this point that Warner's making real quick here. So he's making kind of 2 very clear points. One, when you're thinking about the pipeline targets you should be creating from a capacity plan, it needs to be based upon 100% of quota capacity, not the attainment. There's always this debate here with marketing. We see it all the time. It's like, why isn't it based upon attainment? If you do it on attainment, you're essentially saying to the sales organizations, we're not trying to create enough pipeline to allow you to hit 100% of your quota. That's thing one. Thing two, what Warner is saying is a capacity plan cannot just be a sales headcount exercise. It needs to include all the major function across your go-to-market. So how much pipeline is it? How many BDR headcount do we need to have to soak up that pipeline? How many BDRs or how many salespeople? If we close all that stuff, how many onboarding people? Like, it needs to be an entire go-to-market. Warner, did I summarize that correctly? I want to make sure that.
Absolutely, and that's exactly. And I think when you get all those pieces, there's a lot of pieces to it. And what happens is, that's too complicated. We're just going to take this high level now. But the risk you run is why, and Rice said it so well, the oh shit meetings. I know we're only going to talk about one, but there's at least 3 that happen. And without doubt, there's always one or fail. There's one in Q2 because the capacity doesn't really line up with what actually is happening with what was assumed. So 100%.
Love it. So again, everybody, we're intentionally not covering all these. We're just highlighting some of the classic ones here. If you are making any of these mistakes and you have further questions, again, drop questions in here. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Happy to follow up with this coming out of this. All right. Timeline and process. We're going to start first with what should the capacity planning process look like, and then we'll kind of dive into the timeline of when should you start a capacity planning. So we normally think in most general capacity plans, it's generally loosely a 5-stage process, and there's a number of kind of like subtasks under each one. But at a very high level, it's stage alignment and definitions. This is the thing Grady was talking about in the problems, right? Getting aligned around what is an MQL, what is stage 2. Second is building the bottoms-up model, and the bottoms-up model is essentially historically what have we done. So taking the last trailing 12 months, 18 months to say, what were our conversion rates? Hey, our S1 to close one was 25%, which means we need 4x pipeline, that type of stuff to build that bottoms up waterfall. The third is laying over the top down. The top down, this is the expectations from the board, the executive, things like this. By the way, what's very important about this is the order of operations here. Too often times people flip the top down instead of the bottoms up. So being able to essentially say, hey, what's the bottoms up? Then what's the board meetings? Werner mentioned the oh shit. We're going to talk about this. There's usually 3, but the first one we're referencing here is this happens 99 out of 100. Like the top down and bottoms up don't meet. So like, how do you align those two? And then the last thing is, how do you then take, once you've aligned on everything, how do you take the targets and continually track them moving forward? Grady, when you're doing kind of like classic capacity planning, where do people get this wrong? Like, what are the steps they either skip, misorder? What does that look like?
Yeah, I just want to clarify a couple of things. Maybe the group is unaware. So when we say like the top down versus the bottoms up, we mean what quota do we have on the street? And that includes, potential hires in the future. So we want to look at, okay, what's our quota on the street? And is that even enough to meet the board target? Because if your board target is higher than your quota that you're going to have on the street, you're basically assuming that reps are going to hit over 100% attainment. So it's a pretty risky way to run the business. So that's kind of what Reese means when he's talking about marrying the top down, bottoms up.
Grady, didn't you have a customer here recently where you were having a conversation with them where they didn't realize that, and you all of a sudden were having to kind of point out the fact that, their board targets were not necessarily aligned with how much quota they had on the streets?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that happens somewhat regularly where, there's levers that you can pull in order to kind of make up the difference or the gap. A lot of the time it might have to do with hiring. But yeah, I would say some of the common mistakes when we're talking about setting some of those metrics, I would say I would get down to the level of granularity that makes sense for your business, meaning if you have 3 different kind of sales motions or teams, you have an SMB, a mid-market, and an enterprise, I would just make sure that you're pulling the right historical data that flies at the same altitude and you're not applying a general conversion rate for across all different segments. So I would not collapse that down, because what you end up finding, and maybe you have two different motions. Maybe you have an expansion motion for your install base, and maybe you have a new logo motion. A lot of times people will just kind of apply a peanut butter spread of like, oh, our conversion rates are 20%. But if you dig into it, it's like, well, actually your expansion close rate is 40% and your new logo close rate is 10%. So you need to get down to the right level of altitude and make sure you're using the right metrics. I think that's always a big kind of light bulb for a lot of clients, is that you can't just apply a general conversion rate. You need to get specific down to kind of the motion, the number of segments that your team has, and all of that.
That's a great call out of like trying to find that right balance of like, what's the level of granularity to get to? Because at the end of this, to Grady's point, you're trying to get to a place where you have targets. That's not just a bookings targets, but it's what are your pipeline targets? What are your SAL? What are your MQLs? By go-to-market motion, that enterprise, that new business versus expansion that Grady mentioned, or the enterprise versus mid-market. And these are accurate or directionally correct targets where you're tracking them appropriately. All right, Warner. So we've talked about kind of the 5 steps in the process. One of the classic mistakes we make, or we see people make all the time, is timeline of when do you start it? When do you recommend, from a best in class, that organizations are starting their capacity planning process?
July, you're talking about it. August, you're getting going. That's ideal. I mean, that's how much time you need to get it right. And again, a lot of the time we see this, we start in October, November, and you're trying to crunch through. I mean, think of all the processes you've got to go through. You've got to get the team set up, who's going to be run plan, and get their AC all done. Who you're going to get all the approvals from all the C-suites along the way. There's a lot of information that needs to flow. It's cross-functional. It's go-to-market. There's marketing, there's sales, there's finance that need to be involved. So there's so many steps. So you really should be thinking about this in July, and really getting going in August after the summer, depending on where you are. But that's very much what a good start on that would be.
So I'm curious, Warner. One of the questions we get a lot is, all right, I sell into the enterprise, and we have 12, 18-month sales cycles. How do you think about capacity planning when your sales cycles are longer than the kind of time period that, so you start in July, right? You're essentially kind of like 6 months till the new year. But if you have a 12-month sales cycle, what you're essentially saying is Q1 and Q2 pipeline of the following year, that pipeline's already baked. That's already there. How do you think about that capacity plan and that pipeline creation, particularly for organizations that have longer sales cycles?
And that's where it comes down to the granularity of what you got to get to, because you need to understand that enterprise team as specifically as if it's 18 months, and we actually have a customer that it is about that. And you projecting out of where you expect that to be. What are those pipeline targets need to be specifically for those conversion rates? And that's where, when we're looking at a capacity plan, yes, you're building for next year, but you need the flexibility to say, what would a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year capacity plan look like? And you're pushing everything out. So fine, yes, you're building for next year, the next fiscal, but you need to be thinking the fiscal, the next fiscal out. So important and very important question that your capacity plan that you're building, it's not always defined for the fiscal you're looking at. You've got to absolutely be looking at those sales cycles and what's going to happen in the next 6 months and how that's going to impact next year, but not just next year, the year after.
So I just want to stop there because Warner's making a very important point here. One, start early. Like we literally across, we have across all our customers right now, I can probably count on one hand the number that are starting in July or August. 2, capacity planning is more of a dynamic process, less of this kind of one time. And particularly if you have longer sales cycles, thinking about capacity planning, not just in a 1 year time horizon, but a multi-year time horizon. I'm curious, is anybody here on the call today starting their capacity planning in Q3 generally? I know we're up against lunch, so people either door dashing their lunches or not responding because they know that they're starting in Q4.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can chime in, Reese. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, having been in the strategy and planning world for a long time as well, we've seen a lot of different capacity plans, multi-segment. Starting point for sure, you know, like in the July timeframe for an annual fiscal, preliminary, right? So
yep.
ideally getting some guidance from you know, at the corporate level or from finance, aligning on, you know, maybe two different scenarios to base a bottoms up capacity on, whether it's a, you know, a high growth or a modest growth. So getting to a starting point, but to what you guys were talking about, having an always on view of capacity, a rolling view, rolling 4-quarter view. I mean, that's like the utopia, right? But starting the bottom up build, you know, in kind of the July, August timeframe, and then iterating on it for sure.
Thank you, Brett. I really appreciate lunch not jumping in the way of you interacting. So I could not agree with you more. Like I think start early, thinking about things in a more dynamic, always on, particularly if you have longer sales cycles. Obviously, you have more flexibility kind of if you got shorter sales cycles.
Hey.
All right. I'm intentionally moving quick because this is dense. We got a lot of stuff. Grady, you want to add something?
Yeah, just if you don't have pipeline targets and you've never done this process before, I would not say wait until Q3. Like go ahead and do a V1. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be difficult. It's whatever, but it's fine. Like just to get pen to paper and just I would start today sooner than later. It's better to have somewhat, you know, like to build capacity out, to build pipeline targets that maybe the data is not great, or maybe you're making some assumptions. It's better just to start to build the muscle today and at least have some basis of like, hey, this is how much pipeline we think we should be creating sooner rather than later.
Could not agree with that more. And I think one of the things that kind of does this conversation a disservice, and it's probably on us, of calling it a capacity plan, because then you think of it as only a headcount kind of exercise. This is not a headcount exercise. One of the outputs is a headcount thing, and there are several more outputs, as Grady is acknowledging here, one of them being pipeline targets and things like that. All right. So we talked about kind of the problems up front where we see the biggest mistakes. One of the classic ones was not getting the building blocks right. Grady highlighted this specifically. So we're going to highlight a couple of the important building blocks. These are things, if you don't have them today, I can unequivocally, you just need to go do them. Like this is like, you cannot report it. You will not be able to report on data or things like that. So the first is like understanding, do you have alignment across your funnel? This right here, what we're looking at is something called life cycle stages. Grady, you want to quickly explain like why, what's the importance behind life cycle stages and why it's so important, particularly from a capacity planning process?
Yeah, I mean, you just need to know exactly, when you're calculating your conversion rates and you're trying to understand even just the status of an account. Today, a lot of companies are moving more towards kind of an ABM approach where, it's a combination of sales and marketing and just having a single definition of, okay, this account is now a subscriber, this account is now a lead, just creates alignment across all the different departments. And then it's going to help with all of your conversion rates and assumptions that you need to build into the model. So it's super important to have all your definitions and everyone's kind of playing from, looking at the same scoreboard, basically. And
this sounds like very rudimentary and basic, but I can guarantee you we have worked with multiple multi-$100 million, billion-dollar plus companies where you go in and ask, what is your definition of an MQL? And they have 10 different definitions of an MQL. It's very hard to report on things like an MQL if you come into a meeting, and I'm pretty sure we've all sat in this meeting where we come into a meeting and somebody says, yeah, we did 1,000 MQLs last month. And somebody else like, what do you mean we did 2 MQLs? And then you spend 37 minutes going back and forth about what is an MQL. So just to be very clear, life cycle stages, this is your customer journey in all the different stages. And you can see here, we've got entrance and or exit criteria about what are the activities need to happen, what are the automation. This will help getting you to a place where, we call it the Rosetta Stone or the hook down phonics. Everybody's reading from the same sheet of music. All right, very similar to life cycle stages, stage advancement criteria. So once you have something in the pipeline, Warner, why is this so important? I know you spend a lot of time with companies doing this on a regular basis, making sure they have this aligned so that you can project this out from a capacity plan standpoint.
No, it is, and for years, I mean, going back to, it was for RevOps in early 2000, was just to get agreement on what the stage names were and how things funnel. But from the stage, you get milestones. Milestones need to be completed. That helps you know, do I move over to the next stage or not? But the milestones, what's also important about them, it's about quality of the pipeline. Because ultimately, we know garbage in, garbage out. Pipeline is messy. It is. It's very hard to get a sales organization to all do things the exact same way. Everyone's going to do it their own way. And this is the guide. This is like you saw earlier with the marketing funnel. It's the sales funnel now with pipeline, to be very clear about what those stages are. The names don't matter in a way, because there's always going to be someone that argued. This is really hard just to get agreement between the CEO and the CRO and the sales VP. Sometimes they just can't get aligned just on the name. For me, don't worry about the names. Make sure that you got 4 stages, 5 stages. I wouldn't do more than that. That's what you have. I'm sure you've got your sales stages already well defined, but it's super important what you're seeing on the screen. It's what's the objectives of that stage. What's the default forecast category? People can go change it, but that's going to give you a weighted pipeline. Very important to understand that. And then that entrance criteria, I can't stress how important that is to understand what are those milestones that you expect. And the suggestion here, if you don't have the milestone by stage, start with 3. Always good to start with 3, just agree those, and then get to 4. You don't want to overload the sales team at once, but put some milestones in there. It'll help, and involve your sales teams in creating those. They know this well, and that gets the buy-in from the sales organization. But to Rice's point, this stuff is critical, because when you're building what Rice and Grady were talking about earlier, about the granularity you need to go to. So I need to know the stages moving from an opportunity from discovery to evaluation. That's going to have a conversion rate. And then from evaluation to proposal. So those are conversion rates is what you start to use as you reverse engineer from capacity to productivity to figure out what your pipeline targets are going to be for the future. So that's why it's important to try to get the quality of your pipeline up. You get your quality of your pipeline up, those conversion rates start to be more accurate. The conversion rates are more accurate. That means you get to productivity and capacity. The targets of the pipeline through that will be more accurate.
I could not agree with everything Warner is saying. What if you currently don't have alignment in your organization on life cycle stage or stage advancement criteria? I can unequivocally guarantee you, if you get this alignment, you will close more deals at a higher rate. Hard stop. Like we see it across companies all the time. If you have questions about these templates, happy to send you examples of these templates. You want to do this, codify it into your systems, enable it. This is the backbone to doing any of the capacity planning. So I know we're starting here, but to Warner's point, we can't then sit down and say how much pipeline you need if you don't understand what your conversion rates are. All right. Talked about some of the building blocks. There's others, but those are like 2 of the key functions. Let's move to kind of like marrying the bottoms up with the top down, right? So as Grady alluded to earlier, the bottoms up, this is your historical model. So as you go to build this, one important note, this is not just a sales model. Let me be very clear about this. This model needs to be sales, it needs to be marketing. So what's all the pipeline, the leads, all that type of stuff. It needs to be BDR. How many BDRs do you need to soak up those leads? Are they going inbound? Are they going outbound? It needs to be CS, onboarding, engagement, all that type of stuff. You need to look at it from a historical standpoint. So what has gone on over the last 12 months historically? What are your conversion rates? Grady made a really good point about like, what's that right altitude you need to fly at? All right, you've got both a new business and expansion. You've got a mid-market and an enterprise. All right, you probably need to break it out by those things to understand what are the differences there as you start to break it out. That top down, that is the kind of board expectations, things like that was very, very, very important about the top down. This will help all of you. And I'm not sure if we got operators on the phone or executives or things like that. Please do not have your CEO agree to anything before you built the bottoms up. One of the classic things we've seen is, and this typically happens in the Q3 or the Q4 board meeting, some board member typing away on their computer, ordering DoorDash, they're not paying attention to anything. And then all of a sudden the question comes up of like, hey, what should we grow at next year? And they kind of look up and they're like 50%, and CEO agrees to that. And then that then becomes the top down number, and you haven't even examined, is that possible or not? So you will save a lot of heartache if you can build the bottoms up first, which again, starting earlier in July will go a long ways. Grady, you have built about 1,000 bottoms up models. Walk us through kind of like some of the key like steps that's very important as you're kind of like building these models, and like what are things that people need to think through, particularly to build like a directionally correct bottoms up model?
Yeah. So, the first thing is, like we've been talking about, is just you need to know your conversion rates, right? And get to the level of specificity that makes sense for your business, if it's by motion, if it's by team, but you need to be able to have an intelligent conversation about, what is a realistic conversion rate for each of these steps, right? So when you're going from revenue target or bookings, right, there's always a cushion, right, at each level that, so typically your street quota, what you would do is you would divide by what you expect your kind of your attainment to be, right? So if you think that you need 75% attainment, or 75% attainment is realistic to hit your board number or your bookings number, then you typically kind of divide that by 7.75, and that gives you the quota that you need on the street. You want to make sure that you have the right amount of quota, or at least the quota that you have is greater than that number. And then, it's just you kind of use these conversion rates just to go backwards. So you need to know, okay, we have how much pipeline we need, how many of our SQLs on average are converting to the next stage, to converting to pipeline. And so you're just kind of doing basic arithmetic of, okay, let's divide by these conversion rates at each step in the process. But as long as you are able to, pull those with a reasonable accuracy, there's always the kind of next thing is the bargaining that always happens. So, we always talk about like the past is the best predictor of the future. But I would look at that assumption to make sure that it still holds for your business. So when you're looking at historical conversion rates and you're saying, oh, we have a 10% conversion rate at this stage, okay, is that still relevant? Maybe you've made some investments, maybe you've like changed your business model, maybe you have a new product that's launching, whatever. But I would use all of the historical data to create your conversion rates in order to do this kind of reverse waterfall. But look at your assumptions, make sure that the assumptions that today are going to continue to be true into the future, because you might need to massage these, and we kind of call this like our horse trading, where we say, oh, actually we think we can get a little better efficiency from MQL to SQL because we've done some enablement and training, we invested in a new BDR manager, whatever it may be. So we think we can take that 10% to 15%. But I would say just start with your historical data, and then you can kind of massage from there.
And to add to that, I think what's important, help you here is that as you're looking on the screen, reverse engineering the funnel, if you've got 3 teams, enterprise, mid-market, SMB, do 3 versions of this, so you can see what that looks like. It's not just the one funnel as we spoke about earlier. You can do that at a high level, but those conversion rates are going to change depending on the segment of customer you sell into, or the segment of your sales organization. Again, depending on how big they are. But a very quick way, a nice way to do that is just replicate this and then run the numbers for those particular segments. It might not be sales team, it might be segment of customer, and you that creates more accuracy. Back to what we were saying earlier, the granularities, the more granular you can go, the more accurate you're going to be. And
to the point that both of them are making, as you are making assumptions, hey, you have an analogy Grady gave, hey, we think we can get a higher in-field SAL rate. Document those assumptions. They shouldn't just be fun with Excels, like, hey, we're changing the Excel model. All right, Werner, as you're going through this, right, we have this kind of like checklist of things we need in order to kind of input into the model. Like, walk us through this kind of like checklist. What are some of the key things that people either forget or, we need to make sure are in the model that like are really key factors into this?
Yeah, I think the first part, that third column, owner, who owns it? and that's the RACI. So, big advocate, when you're doing your planning process, just get a simple RACI together, understanding what are the pieces that we need to think through, who's going to own it and who's going to be accountable and so forth. So first piece, but because it is important, and I know it's not always the same in all organizations, but finance is a really important business partner when you get into these pieces. Headcount, budgets, approvals, they've got an FP&A plan to hit based on margin of what the company needs to deliver on. You don't always have visibility of that. So they've got their own issues they need to solve for. So the connectivity between finance and RevOps and marketing is super important when you're doing capacity planning. So there's alignment. You don't want to go say we need 10 sales heads and finance come back and say, well, we can only afford 5. Or they're going to give you the 10 sales heads and they'll say, fine, but you can add 5 now, but the other 5 you can hire in Q4. When you factor in ramp times, even hires in Q3, they're not going to have any impact on your plan for the year. So important to understand that headcount plan. Ramp curves, as I just alluded to, ramp times are really important to understand. You won't believe how many sales organizations we still talk to. And when I always ask the question, what's your ramp time? And it's sometimes, I don't know, a lot of the time it's 4 to 6 months. This is ramp times you should know. If you don't, go look at your new hires for the last 12 months, figure out how long they took to get to the average production of the sales team. And that leads to I'll come back to attrition, but that leads to productivity. So when we're talking productivity, you heard Rice talk about trailing 12 months or trailing 18 months. Take what's simple calculation, take the bookings for the last 12 months, look at how many salespeople you had for those 12 months, divide one by the other, you're going to get a productivity number. So what's the average production per salesperson? Once I know that, then I know how long did it take those new hires to get to that average production. You need to do that monthly, but that's productivity is really important. Attrition, of course, there's people going to be attriting out. Again, just look at how many people exited for the year. Just do it month by month. How many salespeople did we have? How many hires how many people did we lose? And you're going to get a percentage. Generally runs 10, 5, 10, 15. If you start hitting above 15%, I'll start to worry, because that means you've got a lot of people attriting out that you need to backfill, which means you've got ramp times that you need to factor into the model. Then get into things like the sales cycle and velocity. Super important to do your velocity, sales velocity calculations. CROs should be living and by it now and breathing by it. So again, there's a formula for sales velocity. Just if you don't know it, just go Google it. You'll get the velocity formula and start to figure out your velocity. And of course, that marketing mix which we were talking about earlier with reverse engineering the funnel.
Couple of important points there. One, talking about ramp here. If your plan is dependent on hiring a bunch of headcount and you hire them in the back half of the year, probably not going to help. Probably not going to help. 2, attribution. You should build it attrition. You should build it into the model. The easy button, you don't need to get super detailed. Take that kind of like peanut butter spread that Werner's talking about, take it off the top. Third thing, sales velocity, for those of you who don't know, it's the vastly more superior metric to track productivity than quota attainment. Quota attainment is a garbage metric. Sales velocity, for those who don't know, is number of ops times ASPs times conversion rates divided by sales cycle. It essentially gives you a productivity or an efficiency metric. And it's great to compare different reps, different teams, different geos, all that type of stuff. Werner, I know you're making this point right here. Any other kind of points you want to make, particularly on the headcount or the ramp piece?
Yeah, no, I just that bottom of the screen, productivity. So times headcount is capacity, and that productivity calculation is what's the average production per salesperson. So super important. Again, capacity is not your quota attainment. Like we said, you don't want to look at what people attain to their quotas. There's just so many different ways you could have set the quotas and variables, and people's quotas change. There's just too many unknowns. So really get grounded in this formula there. Productivity times headcount equals your capacity. That factors in when you're looking at, new hires come in, productivity is going to drop. And that's also another very important part, right? More salespeople you're bringing fast, your productivity starts dropping. If you've added too many salespeople, it's hard to get your productivity back up to where it needs to be. And what happens? You start letting go of salespeople. So if you get this right, you're going to make sure your productivity targets stay where they need to be. You don't overhire, and you're hiring people at the right time. And then, of course, super important to just focus on those ramp times. This is enablement should be all over your ramp times. because this determines how the onboarding programs are working, and are the teams getting to productivity as you would expect. I will defend, I can't stress enough, enablement is your friend, and it's very important. Now, there's only a certain amount of time. I mean, you can't just suddenly say, I can ramp someone in 30 days. It takes time, depending on the business. Maybe if they're already in the business, you could do that, but it does take time. The right programs need to be in place. You need to have the right manager coaching programs. I won't get into enablement. That's a whole nother session, but focus on ramp times as well.
Warner's bringing up a really good point here of productivity should be your leading indicator when and how you hire. We've seen so many organizations. This is why the capacity plan is so important. Seen so many organizations just say, oh, I need to go hire 10 reps. I'm going to hire them tomorrow. And there's no pipeline there ahead of time. Productivity drops, and all of a sudden they churn out. So this is why that whole integrated capacity plan makes such a difference. So talked about building kind of the bottoms up, key factors you need in it. You marry it then down with that kind of top down board / executive level. Hey, we want you to grow at 50% in a perfect world. I am telling you, I've sat in this meeting 1,000 times. There are 3 oh shit meetings on the calendar. First oh shit meeting is the one where you realize the bottoms up doesn't mean the top down. 99 times out of 100, that oh shit meeting always happens. Second oh shit meeting sometimes happens slightly differently, but it's essentially when you realize what are the actual targets you need to hit for next year. And it's not just a bookings target, but it's like amount of pipeline, amount of MQLs. Oh, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Marketing, Alex and I have sat in this conversation many times. You need to go create a bajillion MQLs. Good luck with that, right? So there's that OSHA meeting. And then the third one, Warner was alluding to this earlier. This is the one that usually takes place 6 months after you finish it. So it's actually a year later, usually in the summertime. If you haven't been tracking your demand count, or you haven't been tracking your capacity plan, well, all of a sudden you realize you're not going to hit the targets for the year. We're going to talk about the first oh shit meeting and trying to marry that top down with the bottoms up. Grady, you've sat in this meeting as many times as I've sat in this meeting. Walk us through, like, how do you kind of rectify and kind of align the top down and the bottoms up?
Yeah. So Reese kind of talked about the sales velocity equation and just those metrics, right? So it's the throughput of the organization. I mean, there's a couple ways, right, that you can kind of bridge the gap. And it's really those 4 metrics are huge in that. And so it's just volume, so number of opportunities. Can you go out and find additional customers? Can you maybe increase the aperture in your ICP? Can you do, I don't know if you have a new product launching or something that you could bring in some additional customers. That always helps in terms of just pure volume. You've got conversion, right? So looking at, okay, maybe we can invest in some training and enablement to increase our conversion rates. Maybe we introduce some type of sales method like MedPick or whatever it may be to make sure that we're getting better conversion through the sales funnel. Bigger deals, you could look at multi-product, you could look at pricing and packaging and all that kind of fun stuff to try and increase basically the ASPs, or the average deal value of each of your deals. And then you've got the velocity. So can we sell faster? So all of those 4 things kind of are the 4 metrics that lead to the throughput of the go-to-market org. And so that is, all of those will help you kind of bridge that gap. And then kind of, that Warner was talking about, I mean, there's also the headcount that you could go out and hire additional ones, but you do want to make sure that you're supporting them so that your productivity doesn't, fall off a cliff. And so there's no point in hiring those people. So if you are going to go out and hire additional people so that you can increase the total capacity of the organization, that's fine, but just know that it also comes with accompanying investments in marketing, in support staff, and all of the kind of things that these reps are going to need to be successful. And so you can't just go out and hire 10 new salespeople and not support them and then expect to kind of close that gap.
And one interesting note here, one of the questions we're getting a lot of is in around AI and how does AI change some of this? We are seeing some VCs, I kid you not, they're moving from the rule of 40 to the rule of 60 because they think AI is going to all of a sudden overnight create 50% efficiency. By the way, that's not happening. It is creating efficiency. It's not at that scale just yet. So there are, to Grady's point, as you're thinking about stuff, are there support things? Are there things that may drive 10% increase in production? Well, if so, is it a AI point specific tool? How is that enabled? How are we making sure everybody's doing? Like, is those types of things making sure we're going through? The do's and the don'ts here, particularly on this slide, are super important, because if you get this meeting right, it will align your entire go-to-market team around, hey, we've all come to these targets together and we're going to run at these together. All right, I'm intentionally moving quick because Alex will give me shit in classic fashion. I always go too long. So anyways, I'm trying to make sure we can get everybody out of here at the top of the hour. So yeah. All right, translating assumptions into the initiatives. Grady was talking about kind of marrying this, and like, as you're starting to do that, you're going to have to acknowledge like key things you're going to have to do. Hey, the MQL, the pipeline conversion rate, we think we can increase that. You know, what is the initiative? What is super, super important about this is this should not just be a fun with Excel exercise. It's really easy to make any model say whatever you want it to say. But if you're truly actually going to change something, what are the initiatives that you are going to do, and document them and hold yourself accountable. Warner, any best practices here when you've seen teams that are kind of like going through this of trying to marry that bottoms up with the top down, saying, all right, well, we think we can increase this. Here's the initiative. Like, any best practices?
Yeah, I think it's this. We live in a world, the two parts, right? The old world where you literally say, I need a 10% lift. I remember my CEO used to come to me regularly, actually, Citrix, and he said, I want a 10% lift in productivity for next year. And it's, well, a 10% lift in productivity means there's a number of strategic initiatives that need to happen, but they're strategic initiatives, which means they take time to have impact. So even if you're running and redoing your onboarding program or dropping in a value selling program and you've got a great methodology that's coming in, it takes time for those to take hold until you see those productivity lifts. So it's really important to understand what are the percentage increases that you expect from strategic initiatives. But again, base that on productivity. If your productivity is running at 100K per quarter per salesperson, and I want a 10% lift, that means I need 110% more productivity. And then you can start to work down on how you're going to get that 10% and how's it going to actually ramp over the year. So for me, that's really important to be realistic. I think that's what I'd say, Russ. You've got to be realistic with your strategic initiatives on what you think that can drive. But there's many factors. I'm focusing more on the sales side. There's the enablement teams, of course, of what that can drive. There's marketing of what they can do. I love that. Tightening the MQL criteria. Really important, but back to the original part. You can't tighten it if you don't have the definitions right. So if you don't have your definitions for your MQLs to sales qualified leads or whatever the funnel is, I go spend time getting that all done. And to Grady's point, I've started now. So by the time you get to August, you've got all this in place, and you've got the models to then just update with the data.
Could not agree more. So super important. So we've built the building blocks, you build the ground up kind of model, you layered in the top down, you had the ship meeting, everybody aligned, said, great, this is what we're going to run at. We have our headcount, we've got our targets we're going to do next year. All right, we're going to put this in a drawer, now revisit it again, and that's how we run into third ship meeting, right? It is super important. If you only do a couple of things here, tracking these targets on an ongoing basis is one of the best keys to success in order to make sure you've hit it for the year. One of the things we found super successful is something we call demand council, but what this is a weekly reoccurring meeting where you're reviewing the targets that come out of your capacity plan, and you essentially ask yourself, are you on track or are you off track? If you're off track, where are you off track and why? And what are you going to do about it? And then you hold yourself accountable to it. That is what demand council is. Grady, you have built, MC'd, done about 1,000 demand councils. Best practices about implementing a demand council successfully.
Yeah, for sure. I think just making sure it doesn't become a data readout, right? So just very tactically try to automate all the pulls from your CRM into, if you're doing it in a spreadsheet, if you're going to try and run it in your CRM, that's fine. But I would just say, I would try to get to like a root cause analysis, like ask, why is this happening? So, hey, our conversion at this stage is definitely getting blocked. Like we can see that we have a ton of MQLs, but we have basically no new pipeline. So what's happening here? Like we have a clog basically in the funnel, right? And so I would say, just trying to understand, you're gonna have to dig into the data and look at like what's happening, why is this happening, what can we do about it to fix it. I would say a week doesn't make a trend, but if you see something over the course of 2 or 3 weeks and you're starting to get behind pace, and you'll know your business. Some businesses are lumpier than others. Some have a kind of maybe lower sales prices, so there's a ton more deals, so maybe it's more consistent. But whatever looks normal or abnormal for your business, you just gonna have to dig in and kind of look at the data. So really, demand council, you can think of it as like it kind of shows you where the problems might be. It'll help you create smoke before there's fire, but you're going to have to do the hard work of actually going in and figuring out the root cause of why certain things are happening, and then just commit to actually creating a plan, so a remediation plan, and actually holding everyone accountable week over week to status updates on, okay, so what are we doing about it? That's kind of my advice.
We'll include this in the follow-up email. I'm not going to go through it now, but this is like a great way to how to implement it. We're happy to send out a video as well. We've got an overview about kind of what is demand council. Again, this is a great way to track things and avoid that third OSHA meeting. All right, I want to make sure we get to this. How does technology and AI fit into all of this, since things are clearly changing here? So from an AI perspective, Warner, I'd love to get your perspective, right? How are you seeing this change, kind of like, how companies are looking at capacity planning, whether it's from an output, we talked about productivity, things like that. What's your perspective from an AI perspective as you're thinking about building that capacity plan?
Yeah, I think, most organizations today, they're running some form of AI to improve the productivity of the sales team, which ultimately should increase capacity. But I think what you're seeing is there's a lot of AI coming, and what I think 2026 is going to be about is understanding what AI is actually driving the higher productivity and helping me increase my capacity versus others that aren't. Because we saw a lot. What last year was that the AI was going to replace SDRs and salespeople actually before that. I think we realized that that's not realistic, but they will drive efficiency. It's much easier to source information, get emails written for you, take all the information that you've seen about the accounts and build the pain points or whatever it might be to align to then email that company. So instead of taking 2-3 hours to do all that, it's done in 5-10 minutes. So there'll definitely be efficiencies where there is more time to sell. So we see it, but I think there's this very much this year. If you're running some AI, which I'm sure some of you are, really start to track get your productivity numbers, see what they were last year, that trailing 12 months. And then start to compare. And are you seeing a lift in the productivity now that you've got the AI in there? If you're seeing that, okay, great, things are going well. That means you're going to start seeing more capacity. But I'll be very careful we said it earlier, right? If your CEO says, "Oh, with all this AI in, we're just suddenly going to get to a rule of 60," it's not realistic. Your productivity does not change that fast. It doesn't. It takes time. It takes time for things to be embedded. So be realistic and put realistic assumptions on. I know that's always hard, but that's why what you've been going through and understanding and producing those models gives you the backup to have those conversations with the C-suite on why the capacity needs to be where it is and what you're predicting, then trying to put numbers out there that don't make sense. And then if the numbers,
No, and I think you're talking about exactly some of this how to operationalize some of the AI in terms of like different areas, whether it's forecasting, outbound, eligibility scoring. I did also want to touch on, Warner, walk us through a little bit of like one of the things we haven't talked about, and I think this is where technology can really help kind of level up, is sensitivity analysis, hiring scenarios, like traditional, capacity planning 2, 3, 4 years ago, pre some of these, badass software and AI tools was very kind of Excel driven. But now with some of this technology, you can do a lot more like real-time dynamics and sensitivity planning. Walk us through like what you're seeing and like how you think about some of these like sensitivity analysis.
As simulations, it's just as we've gone through this. There's so many data points. There's a lot of information to consume and calculations, and a lot of that it's just done, by pulling data from Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever the marketing platform is, and so forth. Or maybe it's just all HubSpot or Snowflake. You got to get pieces out. So there's a lot of information to do it, but there's ways that what we've done later is to just organize that in a more structured way and put guardrails in that you can operate in. But if you've got all that data sitting in a place that's being transformed and you can work with, you can start to do these simulations at speed. Okay, if we hire 5 salespeople, what happens to our overall capacity in the next year or 2 years or 3 years? So short and long range capacity plans. So it speeds up, and it's that whole point with AI, right? It's speeding up. You still need to do the work. You still need to make sure that you've got things accurate. You still need things defined. But how you then work with that data and be able to simulate different scenarios can be done much faster now with technology. And then, of course, you've got the AI to then help run it against models to say, okay, well, if you do this and you hired people a bit earlier, or if you can get your productivity a bit higher in this segment, you could then drive this capacity. So it's very much helping them with the insights that then come up.
If anybody does want to see a Lative kind of demo or anything like that, you can obviously reach out to Warner. I know we're close to the top of the hour. Last slide, as you're thinking about a 30, 60 day, 90 of like, what are the takeaways from this, last hour of conversation? If you're not doing some version of this, go do this now. I think Grady made a really good point. If you don't have anything, particularly on the building blocks, go start now. It'll be a quick and dirty V1, and you can start to work on the V2. We got 2 minutes left. We just nailed it, and I did the classic mistake of spending too long at the intro. And so we rushed through some like really good topics, but what questions do people have?
I have a quick question. I'm curious how you guys would think about a buffer to the revenue target and how that fits in. So let's say, we want to overachieve. Do we overhire? Do we increase quotas? How does that play into it?
Love that question. Grady, Warner, who wants to take that one?
I think to Grady.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always accomplish that differently depending on kind of the culture of your organization. So when I talk to leaders about, okay, what's the right buffer? Where should the buffer live? How much buffer should there be? I think it depends on kind of your business, how consistent the business is. If you're very early or you have very large deals coming in and your revenue is very lumpy, probably want a bigger buffer between kind of the quotas and the capacity that you're planning versus the board number. If you're very consistent, I think even like HubSpot has zero buffer between basically where their board number, their commit number is, and kind of what their capacity is on the street. They have very consistent business. They've been around a while, whatever. So it's probably an extreme example, but I would say it depends kind of on your business, how lumpy your revenue is, how big your deals are. Can one deal kind of swing, make or break your quarter? And then where the actual buffer lives is going to be kind of a culture decision. So do you want your frontline managers kind of in the trenches with your reps? Then I would not have a huge buffer between maybe your first level managers and like your sales managers and your reps. I would basically have them no buffer between them, because then your managers only succeed when their team succeeds, when the rep succeeds. And so like at each level of management, you can kind of play with how much buffer makes sense for your organization. But it kind of comes down to a culture decision. It's probably bad for culture to have a huge buffer where the reps feel like they failed. The average rep attainment was 60 or 70%, but the CEO and the CRO hit their number because there's such a huge buffer. And it kind of creates this this friction in the organization where there's not an alignment between goals. Hopefully that is a very quick way of answering that. But
awesome question.
Yep. Thank you.
Grady and Warner, thank you both so much. As I mentioned at the top, we're always happy to kind of like chat through additional stuff. So if you're curious about like understanding best in class kind of capacity planning software, AI software, and want to see a demo, you can reach out to Warner. We'll include that in the follow-up. If you just have like questions about capacity planning best practices, we're always happy to jump on a call and kind of like continue to dive into things further. We'll include some information for both Grady and myself. thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to join. We truly appreciate everybody being here, and we appreciate it. Thanks again, Warner. Thanks again, Grady.
Thanks, everyone.